Greetings and welcome to Mother Truckin' Thursday, I guess, for it is Thursday. It is a Just Driving episode, of course. It is not going out on the usual Tuesday because I have been on holiday, which of course is the reason why the channel has been a little bit sparse recently, if you had noticed. You probably haven't. But if you have, that's why. I have been away, but I am returned now, so rejoice, for the videos once again shall flow forth. And we're going to start with a Just Driving episode because A, it's been a while since I, vented my stream of consciousness onto the internet, and so clearly the internet is in desperate need of said venting. And secondly, there is something that I actually want to talk about this week quite a lot, and that is No Man's Sky, which of course is the Hello Games universe sim, procedurally generated, 800 quintillion planets, magnus opus. It's gonna change gaming, it's revolutionary, or at least that's what the hype has led us to believe. Hype which of course, nobody in their right mind actually believed, right? It's really interesting. I mean, there's quite a lot I want to talk about that, so I'm going to get onto that. But before we do that, obviously, we want to pick a destination because we're also going to drive a truck. That's what we do. I mean, if you've not seen one of these before, that's just what we do. I drive a truck and I talk. I mean, you could pretty much achieve the same effect by going out and hitching a ride from a passing truck driver and asking them about politics or the UK games industry or any number of other topics. But, it might get a bit more stabby, so don't do that. Anyway, look, we have driven all the way down from Edinburgh via various cities, arriving most recently in the magnificent capital of London, which of course is large and overcrowded and not my favourite place. And I was thinking about going to Gilford because that, of course, is the home of Hello Games. But Gilford doesn't exist in the world of Euro Truck Simulators. I think the closest we could get is this petrol station just off the M3, which is not actually where Gilford is. I mean, Gilford's a little bit further south, but those roads don't even exist. So, we could maybe go to Southampton and just pretend that the petrol station off the M3 is in fact Gilford and indeed the home of Hello Games. Not to mention Lionhead Studios. Or we could head up to Cambridge, which is the home of Frontier Developments, makers of the Elite Dangerous game, of course, not to mention the fantastic old Frontier Elite 2 and Frontier First Encounters, which, in my humble opinion, kick the bottom of their latest offering. But Elite Dangerous, of course, and indeed the older games, are examples of procedurally generated galaxies, vast procedurally generated games where you couldn't hope to possibly visit every location in it. Anyway, look, we could purchase a truck, but we're not going to because how much money have I got? Look, 7,970 euros. What kind of truck could you get for that? So we're just going to be lazy and we're going to take another job from the job market. As it turns out, there were no jobs available from London to either Southampton via the Hello Games service station on the M3, or indeed Cambridge. So we have had to backtrack a little bit to Birmingham, and I have selected a job which will have us take canned beef from Birmingham to Cambridge to deliver, no doubt, to Frontier Developments in order to energize them for future releases of Elite Dangerous or something along those lines. Anyway, take the job! And here we are in the sunny midnight city of Birmingham, the moony midnight city of Birmingham. Hold on, I just need to remember how to actually play this game. Okay, that's my rear view mirrors, that's my sat nav. How do I look out? There's my windscreen wipers. Lights, okay, more windscreen wipers. I think I put the indicators on. Wow, I really haven't played this game in like a week or 2 weeks, and suddenly I can't remember how to play at all. Alright, fine. Look, let's just get going because clearly we're not going to be able to take a look at the truck before we start because I just have forgotten which key it is. And therefore, we do not need to see the truck. We're just going to assume it is a beautiful truck and we're going to set off. And I think, if I remember correctly, we leave the Birmingham depot by heading left around the corner here, using, of course, my truck Spidey powers in order to determine where the entrance is, or the exit is in this case. And I believe I've got it right. Fantastic. Alright, so as we slowly make our way round, I guess I should begin to talk about No Man's Sky, because that is what I promised at the beginning, isn't it? And that is really what I want to talk about, and kind of related issues to No Man's Sky. Firstly, I should, of course, point out that I don't have a PS4. I have not played No Man's Sky. I am basing my opinions... Oh, wait a minute. What happened there? I somehow managed to roll backwards. Alright, here we go. First gear, and we are away. We are away again, and I am turning left. Left. And we are on the road, taking canned meat to the boys and girls, presumably down at Frontier Developments, and we're gonna have a chat with them, maybe. I mean, probably not, because you know, they're not actually going to be there. But anyway, we can pretend that we're having a chat with them, and that, I'm sure, will be at least as rewarding. Look, I've actually stopped at the red light. What was I thinking? What was I thinking? It must be the fact that it's the middle of the night, and obviously, therefore, I must be shattered. But not so shattered that not so shattered that I turn in front of a truck and a bus. Anyway, we're not here to talk about trucks and buses. We are here to talk about No Man's Sky, and possibly later, my holiday. But first, we're going to talk about No Man's Sky. And as I was saying, I haven't actually played No Man's Sky. What I did do yesterday is I sat and I watched a whole load of YouTube videos that people had uploaded of the PS4 version as I was trying to decide whether or not to buy it. I mean, it's a £40 game. It's had a huge amount of hype, and I've been burned before, as I will go into. But let's take this one step at a time. First of all, let's talk about the hype of No Man's Sky, because it has been perhaps not unprecedented, but it is a very rare thing for a video game hype machine to penetrate into the mainstream media in the way that No Man's Sky managed to do with Sean Murray, the founder of Hello Games, appearing on talk shows. There have been news stories on the main evening news last night. There was a story ostensibly about the Gilford games industry, but really it was about Hello Games, and it was because of the release of No Man's Sky that this thing made the evening news, which is pretty amazing. I mean, like I said, we don't see that kind of penetration into the mainstream media all that often, and when we do, it's more often than not because it's a negative news story rather than a positive one, which is what this kind of very much has been. It's been all about this glorious procedural generation generating 800 quintillion planets for people to go out there and explore, with all of this diverse and mysterious and magnificent alien life to find and name. Which is all very well and good as far as it goes. It's all very interesting and it makes a great news story, of course, but it doesn't really explain what the game is. It doesn't explain what the game mechanics are. What are the mechanics driving this exploration? What is the actual experience like of playing No Man's Sky? None of that has really been touched on at all by the hype machine, which is bad hype. Bad hype. Naughty hype. That is not the way that we should be marketing our games, because it creates essentially a vacuum of information that people fill with their ideals of what the game will be. So you show them these beautiful planets, you don't tell them anything about the gameplay mechanics, and people project onto that this idea that they have of what it would be like to be out there exploring the universe. And that's not going to be what the game is actually like. Now you compare that to something like Civ 6, which is another big game. It's coming out in a few months' time. But already we have lots of information about what the actual gameplay mechanics of that are going to be like. They've actually talked about the gameplay loop, the gameplay logic, the changes they've made to the formulas, the way, their design intentions for the way the game will actually be played. And indeed, they've already had YouTubers in to play the game and allowed them to upload videos about their experience and about their thoughts and what the gameplay experience is like. It's such a marked contrast, by the way, Praxis, if you're watching. Another YouTuber right here. Just, I'll make my own way down to wherever you are. I mean, I'm in the UK. Anyway, look, that is beside the point. The point is just to compare what I consider to be good hype versus bad hype. And the fact that No Man's Sky has been so enormously hyped up without actually giving away any real details of what the game is like, I think should be a big warning flag. And it is something that we have seen before, which we'll get into a little bit later. But that's my thoughts on the hype. Why I think that kind of hype is inevitably going to be bad. Because it's going to produce expectations that no matter how good the game is, it's not going to be able to live up to those expectations, because people have this habit of projecting this perfect vision when there is a lack of information about what the actual game is like. However, that doesn't mean that it couldn't be a fantastic game. And indeed, if you're like me and are incredibly cynical about game hype and basically took everything they said with a grain of salt and therefore had very few expectations of what the game was actually going to be, then you could enjoy it for whatever they have actually created. And that was kind of the view that I was going in with. I was like, okay, let's watch some YouTube videos, because I don't know what to expect. So I'll watch some YouTube videos, I'll watch some gameplay, I will read some of the first impression reviews and stuff that came out. I took a look on Metacritic. Wow, it's got a low user score. Not always that uncommon on Metacritic for low user scores, so you have to take that with a pinch of salt as well, but it can be indicative of problems. Basically, I just did my homework and found out what the game actually was, rather than, what I imagined or hoped it might be. So what is it? I just got a speeding ticket. So what is it? I've never seen one before. No one has, but I'm guessing it's a white hole. A white hole. Sorry. Anyway, what actually is No Man's Sky? This is the big question, and I think I've seen enough gameplay footage. I watched probably a good couple of hours of people playing it yesterday on YouTube, plus I read all of the first impression reviews and things like that, and you know, there was a pretty strong consensus emerged very early on about what No Man's Sky is and what No Man's Sky isn't. Everyone was impressed with the procedural generation technology to a greater or lesser extent. I don't think there's any doubt that it has, you know, it has 100 quintillion planets. There is going to be quite a lot of variety in that, although probably not enough that, you know, if you visit, the problem with having 800 quintillion planets and having your procedural generation system, you know, produce... I've just turned my lights off. How has that happened? Where are my lights? Turn my lights on. There we go. That's more like it. The problem with having so many planets and having your procedural generation system having to create that many, you know, different variations is that a lot of those variations are going to turn out to be very, very, very similar to each other because, you know, by definition, that's just going to have to be... There's only so many variables you can tweak. So I actually think that was a mistake. I think you could make a game with, say, 1,000 planets where each planet was much more different from each other using procedural generation techniques, and that would be a better gameplay experience than having 800 quintillion planets, you know, and having basically each planet be, well, chances are it'll be not all that different from the planet that you just left, especially if you don't have the gameplay mechanics to really give you levers to pull to make planets different from each other, you know, in a more meaningful way. So yes, the procedural technology is interesting. I wouldn't call it revolutionary though, from what I've seen. And I mean, I say that without, obviously, you know, I don't want to belittle what they've done at Hello Games. I'm sure it was an incredibly, you know, technical, challenging goal that they set themselves to be able to produce this kind of, like, you know, procedural generation technique. But I've done a lot of procedural generation myself. I've certainly done a lot of terrain generation, and actually that was one of the things that I thought they were pretty weak on. Most of the terrain that I've seen generated in No Man's Sky, it looks like basically fairly standard Perlian noise, just, you know, like chaos. It's just lots and lots and lots of little tiny islands. It looks great from the ground level, and that is the nature of these kind of systems. They look great from the ground level, but for planetary generation, you want there to be regional differences, regional variations. You want there to be, you know, for at least some types of planets, you want to simulate continental drift and like continental plate tectonics. It amazed me that they didn't have any kind of like polar differences and equatorial differences and stuff like that. I know it's probably partly from a technical point of view because of streaming in all of that stuff to be able to build those environments. You want to, you know, having a single biome or possibly two biomes on each planet, you know, makes it much easier from streaming the data in because you just reuse assets over and over again. But, you know, if you're saying, look, this is revolutionary procedural generation, I didn't see it. I'm sorry, I just didn't see it. The number of iterations that you spit out of your procedural system is irrelevant. I mean, I could sit down and write a game in 5 minutes that would allow me to produce a Googleplex of planets for you to go and explore. And I could probably make them quite different from each other in various ways. But that doesn't mean that, you know, you would actually want to go and explore them all, or indeed explore any of them. And as I said, I think this kind of like this numbers game is something that Elite Dangerous suffers from as well. This numbers game is a trap. To quote a fictional chaos theorist, they got so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think if they should. What is the actual benefit for having so many planets? 700 quintillion, 400 billion, whatever the number is, whatever the absurdity of the number is. Why? Other than as a selling point, other than something to hype around from a gameplay perspective, what does it actually give you? And I think the problem is it doesn't really give you anything. The only kind of argument you could possibly have is that if you're having this online game, this kind of like mass multiplayer online game, but you want everyone to be able to explore in their own space, then you make the universe so huge that everyone can be online together and yet be exploring in their own space. But surely that's a logical fallacy. Either you want to be online together, i.e. you want to be interacting with other people, or you want to be playing on your own in your own little universe. If you want to be online together, the universe has to be smaller in order to give you the ability to actually interact with other people. I mean, that just seems like common sense to me. Likewise, if you want everyone to have their own like experience exploring and discovering things, you make it offline, and then, you know, everyone has their own universe and you don't have to make it this ridiculously vast thing, you know, even if you make it 1 million strong planets, that's still a number that people will just boggle people's minds, and they won't be able to process it, and they'll just go, wow, this game is enormous. So I think, like I say, it is a trap to simply keep going, we're going to make it bigger and bigger and bigger for the sake of making it bigger and bigger. I think you create all sorts of issues for yourself, and you really don't create any opportunities. Oh, look, it's the service station. I don't think that is the Gilford Hello Games service station development location. It is some other random service station. Possibly it has a game development studio in it. Who knows? Anyway, it is not important right now. What is important is that we are on our way to Cambridge to find Frontier Developments and, you know, drop off this tinned meat, apparently. Also, we're continuing to talk about No Man's Sky and, you know, the various things, my various observations on the nature of it as a game and a phenomenon, which I'm sure you're all just absolutely enraptured by. It's just, you know, it's probably blowing your mind. Look, we are coming off the motorway, and we're going down somewhere. I think, in fact, that might even be Cambridge up ahead. Look, we are nearly at our destination, so I should probably wrap up a little bit as far as No Man's Sky goes. I don't want to rag on it too much, because it did look like, in many respects, a fun game. It didn't look like a revolutionary game, though. It looked like pretty much the gameplay, the actual gameplay mechanics, the minute-to-minute gameplay, was pretty much a canned survival game. You know, it was go, find node, drill node, put it in your inventory, refine resources, craft things, progress. What it was missing was any kind of base building and anything kind of out with that loop, other than exploration for its own sake. So I think it's going to be quite shallow in that respect. I think it's probably going to be a game that you get bored of quite quickly, unless you are really, 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 really into the idea of seeing new things. And by new things, I just mean variations on things that you've already seen. I do think it'll probably be a fun game, and honestly, if it was like £15-20, especially if it was marked as early access, I know they are planning on continuing development, but it isn't marked as an early access game, so how much development will happen, obviously we have no idea, or what their plans for that might be. But yeah, if it was like a £15-20 indie game, I would probably buy it, and I would probably enjoy it. At a £40 game, I'm not convinced there is enough substance there to justify that. Look, we've discovered Cambridge! And more importantly, kind of like morally, I'm not entirely convinced that that is a justifiable price tag. I think, you know, I'm kind of one of these people that thinks that what something costs should be primarily related to what it costs to make. You know, if you are a big game studio, whether or not your game is actually brilliant or not, that's another question. But if you're a big game studio that has hundreds of people employed and all of that time and man hours is going into making a game, you probably have to charge more for it than if you are a small team, because your wage bill is going to be so much huger. And that is essentially, have I gone the wrong way? I think I have actually gone past my destination. We're going to have to drive around Cambridge now, look, and try and find our destination. Well, we can keep our eyes open for the Frontier Development Studio, which is bound to be rendered here in this game. Is it over there? I don't know, probably not. We'll keep an eye out for it as we drive around and see what we can see. Look, over there, maybe it's those? I don't know. It's probably not. Yeah, so, like, essentially what it comes down to is if you've got a development studio of, you know, 10 to 13 people, like Hello Games, you can afford to sell your game for a lot less and still make a brilliant return on it. They have chosen not to do that. Now, whether that's Sony, or whether it's Hello Games, or whether it's just because of all the hype, it really doesn't matter to me. But as an individual, I don't like to support that kind of business practice unless the game really delivers. And, you know, my expectation would be very, very high. Look, maybe that's Frontier Developments there, that kind of big warehouse. Maybe Carrefour / you know, Frontier Developments. Yeah, probably not. Oh, look, here we go. This is our delivery point. This must be Frontier Developments. Here we are going to bring the canned meat for them to eat. Despite the fact that we've barely mentioned them throughout the course of this video, and instead have been talking all about Hello Games and, you know, what we think of it. And I think that kind of, just to finish that last thought on, you know, whether or not it's okay for a small indie company to sell a game at a AAA price tag, I think it is okay, but it has to deliver in the way that AAA games do. And, you know, there were a number of things that I noticed in the game, the actual game of No Man's Sky, leaving aside the procedural generation stuff, the actual game was lacking the sort of polish that you would expect from a AAA game, and the sort of polish that I think, you know, is kind of called for if you're going to charge that amount of money. I don't know what I'm doing here, by the way. little examples, things that people brought up in like first impressions videos and things that I noticed when I was watching. The alien species just standing there statically and talking to you, the lack of any real life going on, just again the fact that the gameplay is so generic and is so derivative without really there being a lot of innovation or even a lot of polish on the way in which those gameplay mechanics work and things. And that will be in part simply due to the fact that the team was too small to be able to pull off that kind of level of polish and those kind of like extra details. I'm sure they've been incredibly busy for the 3 years that they've been doing. I'm sure they were pushing themselves incredibly hard to hit that release date, and it is a function of the small team that has meant that this is what we have been this is what's been delivered. So much time and effort went into the procedural generation. They didn't have the developer time and resources probably to do a more sophisticated game with it. Now, if it was me, I think I would have said, look, we need to increase the team size if we're going to go for this. If we're going to reset our expectations of what kind of game we're going to create here, and we want it to be a AAA price tag game, massively hyped, people are going to get really, really into it, and we want to have all of this depth and complexity in that procedural generation system, you need more people to do that. On the flip side, if you want to keep it small and agile, fine. But call it an indie game, set an indie price tag on it, make it an early access game to reassure people that there is going to be ongoing development, that you're going to continue to add depth and sophistication and tweak it and improve it over time. That's where I think they failed. And that's where I think, No Man's Sky is going to... Already it seems like it's going to be another Spore, basically. If you're old enough to remember Spore was like the last time this happened to me. In fact, Spore shares an awful lot in common with No Man's Sky, and indeed the actual gameplay mechanics were very simple. It was essentially a series of mini-games, and each of those mini-games wouldn't have been sort of out of place on like a mobile device or something, or certainly in the bargain bin for sort of £5 or something. So, yeah, it was a great disappointment Spore for me, and really didn't deliver on the hype machine. And again, we see this from time to time. Black and White was another one. I quite enjoyed Black and White back in the day. I mean, that's really dating me now. But Black and White, basically, they made a big thing about it having revolutionary AI programming. It was all about the AI. They were going to have this really intelligent creature. Look, we must be there. Back a little bit more. Yes, look, we've done it. Frontier, you have your meat. Eat it and rejoice. So yes, as I was saying, we see this from time to time. Black and White did it with the creature AI, and then the gameplay mechanics were really very simplistic that worked around that. Now, I actually quite enjoyed Black and White. I don't want to rag on Black and White. As I said, I'm sure I would probably enjoy playing No Man's Sky as well. I just don't think it's worth the price tag that they've put on it, and I think that is perhaps the most concerning thing for me. It was the way the hype was handled and the price tag that they've put on it are not practices that I want to encourage in other game developers, and is not something that I would like to reward. As I said, I would probably enjoy the game if I play it. I think it is probably competently executed. I just don't think there's anything revolutionary or innovative in there. And frankly, I've played a whole load of survival games, and I have a whole load of survival games that are probably better survival game experiences. One of my main kind of issues, actually, when I heard that it was a survival game, it kind of made me scratch my head and think, but part of a survival game is about building up your environment. If you're not building up your environment, if you're not building a base, or you're not, exploring and finding the best places to gather resources and things like that in your environment, if you're constantly moving on to new places, that kind of undermines part of what makes survival games work, at least for me, anyway. So for those reasons, I will not be buying No Man's Sky, at least not until the price drops substantially in some kind of future sale. But I will be continuing to watch it and see how it develops, and see what other people, and indeed YouTubers who I perhaps trust the opinion of more than the random PlayStation 4 YouTubers who I have been watching, have to say about it. And you know what? I may change my mind. If I do, I'll be sure and let you know, and I'll probably put videos of it up as well. But until then, look, we don't have time to talk about my holiday. It was great. I was away for like a week and a half, away from the computer, which was crazy. I got to do archery, all sorts of cool stuff. Maybe I'll talk about that next time. But until then, thanks a lot for watching, everyone. I have been Weird Wizard, and I will see you later.